You want to talk about being out of touch? Because I just sat through a radio interview that had me rewinding my phone screen 4 separate times, convinced there was no way a head coach of a professional basketball team actually said what I just heard her say. I am Dre Fiver. You are locked in with Street Hoops, the only channel on this platform that will look you dead in the eye and tell you the truth, even when the truth is uncomfortable. And today, the truth is uncomfortable for Stephanie White, for the Indiana Fever front office, and frankly, for anyone who has been riding with this coaching staff through their absolutely baffling handling of the most important player to enter the WNBA in the last decade. We are talking about Caitlin Clark. We are talking about transparency, or the stunning lack thereof. We are talking about a head coach who sat down for a radio interview and told the host, with a straight face, that yes, she was surprised that fans were upset when they found out 90 minutes before tip-off that the person they drove hours to see, the person they spent hundreds of dollars on tickets and parking and merchandise to watch, was not going to play. Surprised. That was her word. And I need every single one of you watching this video right now to sit with that for a moment. Because that one word tells you everything you need to know about the disconnect happening inside the Indiana Fever organization right now. Let us set the stage properly, because context is everything, and I want every person watching this to understand the full picture before we go any further. This is not the first time. That is the single most important thing I can say before I say anything else. This is not the first time that the Indiana Fever's communication, or lack thereof, surrounding Caitlin Clark's health and availability has been a major point of friction between this organization and its fan base. There was a pattern last season, a pattern of Caitlin Clark being listed as healthy, being listed as available, only for there to be some last-minute development that changed everything. Fans felt burned. Fans felt misled. And the organization had an entire offseason to reflect on that, to recalibrate, and to come into this new season with a renewed commitment to transparency. That did not happen. And now here we are again, having the exact same conversation, except this time there is even more heat behind it, because fans were told, explicitly, through the official injury report, that everything was fine. That is the part I keep coming back to. 24 hours before the game in question, the official injury report drops. Clean. Not a single name on it. Caitlin Clark is not listed as questionable. She is not listed as doubtful. She is not listed at all, because as far as the organization was telling the world, she was perfectly healthy and ready to go. Fans see that report. Fans breathe their collective sigh of relief. They confirm their travel arrangements. They sort out their babysitters. They pull up their ticket confirmation emails and get ready for a night they have been looking forward to all week. Some of them are driving in from out of state, because that is what Caitlin Clark means to people. She has not built a typical WNBA fan base. She has built the kind of fan base that touring musicians have. People who plan their entire schedules, their entire weekends, their entire trips around the opportunity to see her perform. You have to understand the depth of that investment before you can truly understand the depth of the frustration that followed. And then, 90 minutes before tip-off, the scratch drops. Out. Just like that. And now Stephanie White is sitting in a radio studio saying she was surprised people were upset about that. Dre Fiver is looking directly into this camera right now and telling you that is one of the most tone-deaf things I have heard a sports figure say in a long time. Not because injuries do not happen. Not because athletes do not sometimes have things flare up at the last minute. We understand that. Every real sports fan understands that. The frustration is not about the injury itself. The frustration is about the timeline. The frustration is about the pattern. The frustration is about an organization that spent the better part of last season being shady and evasive about this exact same issue, and then walked into a brand new season and pulled the exact same move. That is what fans are upset about. And the fact that Stephanie White, when given a direct opportunity to demonstrate that she understands the frustration, instead responded with genuine surprise, that tells me she either has not been paying attention or she simply does not care. Neither of those is a good look. Now let us talk about the Kevin Durant comparison, because I cannot let this slide. In that same radio interview, Stephanie White reaches into her bag looking for a precedent that will justify what happened, and she pulls out Kevin Durant missing Game 1 of a playoff series as a late scratch. And she presents this as though it is a parallel situation that proves her point. I want to be very clear about something here. That comparison does not hold. It does not hold logically, and it does not hold factually. When Kevin Durant missed the final game of the regular season, sitting out that last game heading into the playoffs, he gave the fan base a signal. He sat. Fans could do the math. They could look at that missed regular season finale and reasonably think to themselves, he might be managing something. He might be a question mark for Game 1. There was a data point. There was a warning shot. Fans who bought Game 1 tickets could at least factor that possibility into their thinking. The situation with Caitlin Clark was the complete opposite of that. The signal, the official injury report, said everything was fine. There was no warning shot. There was no data point for fans to factor in. There was a clean bill of health 24 hours out and then a scratch with 90 minutes to go. Those two situations are not comparable. They are not even in the same universe. And the fact that Stephanie White either does not see that distinction or chose to present them as equivalent anyway is a problem, because it suggests that when this organization is put on the spot about its communication failures, the response is to deflect rather than acknowledge. And fans see through that. Fans are not naive. Let me shift gears for a moment, because there is a subplot running underneath all of this that I think is actually the most fascinating part of the entire story. And that is the question of whether someone from upstairs had a conversation with Stephanie White before this radio interview. Because if you listen carefully to the full arc of what she says, there is something interesting happening. There is a version of Stephanie White in parts of that interview who sounds unapologetic, who sounds genuinely baffled by the fan criticism, who sounds like a coach operating in her own world, unbothered by the noise outside. And then there is a very different version of Stephanie White who, when asked directly who the #1 offensive option on this team is, says Caitlin Clark. Now, why does that second answer matter so much? Because it runs completely counter to the narrative that had been building around this team since the offseason. The narrative coming out of the Fever camp was not Caitlin Clark first. The narrative was about system basketball, about multiple options, about spreading the wealth. And then Sophie Cunningham, and this is something that was widely reported and discussed across basketball media, gave an interview in which she indicated that the plays were geared toward Kelsey Mitchell. And that comment landed like a grenade in the middle of a fan base that had been sold on the idea of watching Caitlin Clark operate as the unquestioned centerpiece of this offense. Now, I want to be fair here. Kelsey Mitchell is a quality basketball player, and I am not throwing her under the bus. But if you are the Indiana Fever, and your entire business model, your attendance, your television ratings, your merchandise revenue, your cultural relevance, your national media coverage is built on the back of one specific player's star power, and your own players are going on record implying that the offensive system is oriented away from her, you have a messaging crisis. And when your head coach doubles down on that messaging in her own media appearances, you have a business crisis. Because the people writing the checks, the people filling the arena, the people tuning in from living rooms across the country, they are not there for the system. They are there for Caitlin Clark. And I believe, this is Dre's personal take, filed under things I cannot definitively prove, but absolutely believe based on everything I am seeing. That somebody in that front office sat Stephanie White down and had a very direct conversation about what this team's recent trends in the business department look like. I am picturing graphs, I am picturing attendance figures, I am picturing merchandise numbers and streaming data, and I am picturing someone in a suit pointing at all of it, and making very clear that the on-court philosophy and the public messaging needed to realign with the reality of who is driving this entire enterprise. Because that radio answer, our first offensive option is Caitlin Clark, did not come from the same coaching brain that spent the offseason building up a committee-based offensive identity. That answer came from someone who had been reminded of something important. And whatever that conversation looked like behind closed doors, I think it was necessary. I think it was overdue. Here is what makes all of this even more layered. Let us actually look at the recent tape, because the tape matters. The tape always matters. When you look at the last 90 minutes of Caitlin Clark game action, the Valkyrie game, the stretch against the Seattle Storm, the final 10 minutes against the Washington Mystics, you are seeing something different than what we saw in the early part of this season. You are seeing a player who is operating more freely. You are seeing a player who is reading the game, attacking downhill, pulling up from distance, running the offense the way she ran it at Iowa. Whether that is a coaching adjustment, whether that is Clark herself just deciding to take matters into her own hands, or whether it is some combination of both. The product on the floor has looked better. The Fever have looked more dangerous. And the correlation between the team's offensive efficiency and Clark's involvement in the offense is not subtle. It jumps off the screen. This is why the communication failures sting so much harder than they otherwise would. Because you have an asset, and I use that word respectfully, Caitlin Clark is a human being first, but in a business context, she is also an asset unlike anything the WNBA has ever seen. And when the organization repeatedly fumbles the messaging around her, repeatedly creates situations that erode fan trust, it does not just hurt feelings. It hurts the bottom line. Fans who drove in from 2 states away to see her play and found out 90 minutes before tip-off that she was out. Some of those fans are not coming back. Some of those fans are not renewing. Some of those fans are telling their friends about that experience. and those friends are choosing not to buy tickets. That is how erosion happens. Slowly, quietly, and by the time you see it clearly in the numbers it has already done, more damage than anyone wants to admit. I also want to spend a minute on something that might seem like a minor footnote, but that I think actually speaks volumes about this entire situation. The radio host, in what he himself called a friendly jab, pointed out that Stephanie White, Miss Indiana basketball, scoring champion, Purdue national champion, former Fever player, and now Fever head coach, had just attended her very first Indianapolis 500, her first one ever, and the one she chose to attend was the one Caitlin Clark was at. Now look, I am not going to crucify the woman for her personal leisure choices. People can do what they want with their free time. But Dre Fiver is going to notice what Dre Fiver notices. You have every credential imaginable to have been attending that race for years. You have deep Indiana roots. You have strong connections to the city and the state. And the first time you ever show up to the crown jewel of Indianapolis sporting culture is when Caitlin Clark is there as the celebrity attraction. I am just going to let that sit right where it landed. The host noticed it. The fans noticed it. And it feeds into a broader narrative about this coaching staff's relationship with and understanding of the Clark phenomenon. Because if you have been living in Indiana and deeply embedded in Indiana's sports culture, and you have never once felt compelled to go to the Indy 500 before this specific one, I mean, what does that tell you? The thing I keep returning to is this. The Indiana Fever right now are in possession of a once-in-a-generation opportunity. The sport of women's basketball has a visibility and a cultural footprint right now that it has never had before. Television networks are paying attention. Sponsorship money is flowing in. Young fans who had never watched a WNBA game in their lives are now devoted followers. Merchandise is selling. This is a moment, and moments like this do not last forever. They require stewardship. They require organizations to be sharp, to be communicative, to be trustworthy, and above all, to understand what they have. There are signs, real, tangible, on-court signs, that the Indiana Fever are beginning to figure some things out. The recent game action is encouraging. The coaching adjustment, if that is what it is, appears to be happening. But the off-court communication, the injury report transparency, the public messaging around this franchise's most important player, all of that still needs serious work. And Stephanie White's radio interview, as genuinely surprising as parts of it were, is actually a useful document. Because it tells us where the blind spots are. It tells us what still needs to change. And it gives us, the fans, the media, and the people paying close attention to this league, a measuring stick for how far this organization still has to go. I am rooting for the Indiana Fever to get this right. I want to be crystal clear about that. I want Caitlin Clark to be unleashed. I want the Fever to be a championship contender. I want this WNBA moment to sustain itself and grow into something even bigger than what it already is. But organizations do not accidentally build that kind of culture. They build it intentionally, with humility, with self-awareness, and with a willingness to hear hard truths from the fan base that funds the entire operation. Right now, the Indiana Fever are still working on that part, and the clock is ticking. That is what we have got today on Street Hoops. If you made it this far, you already know what to do. Smash that like button right now. Leave your thoughts in the comments below because I want to know where you stand on Stephanie White and whether you think this organization actually has its act together, or whether this is still a front office that is one bad press conference away from another crisis. Subscribe to Street Hoops if you are not already on the squad. We're the channel that never flinches and never filters. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a drop. I am Dre Fiver. We will see you on the next one.